Have you ever wondered what happens when a life is taken by someone barely old enough to understand the consequences? Today, executing anyone under 18 is cruel punishment, according to the U.S. Supreme Court. But it wasn't always this way. For decades, juvenile executions were not only legal, they were alarmingly common. Today's video will unpack the unsettling stories of children who took innocent lives and ended up on death row. James Arsene, State, Arkansas. Date of execution, June 18, 1885. James Arsene holds the grim distinction of being the youngest person in the United States to be sentenced to death and later executed for the crime. Arsene was hanged by the U.S. federal government in Fort Smith, Arkansas, for his role in a robbery and murder committed when he was 10 years old. Arsene and another man, William Parchmeal, spotted William Feigl, a Swedish national, purchasing at a store. They followed him as he headed toward Fort Gibson and caught up with him about 2 miles outside the fort. With robbery as a motive, one of the two shot Feigl 6 times before hitting his skull with a rock. Arsene and Parchmeal then took a pair of boots and some money off Feigl's corpse. Arsene was arrested, tried by a jury, and convicted of the robbery and murder of Feigl. Afterward, he managed to escape and evade capture for a time. However, he was eventually apprehended and executed at the age of 23. Virginia Christian, State, Arkansas. Date of execution, August 16, 1912. On the morning of August 16, 1912, Virginia Christian was sent to the electric chair for the murder of her employer, Ida Belote, after being accused of stealing a gold locket. At 16 years old, Christian became the first and last woman to be executed in the state of Virginia. Although she confessed to the murder, Christian was denied a fair trial. Virginia law at the time prohibited the imprisonment and execution of anyone 17 or younger, but no such exceptions were made for black individuals. Christian's trial was rushed to avoid the threat of mob violence, and she was sent to the electric chair just 1 day after her 17th birthday. Joe Persons, State, Georgia. Date of execution, August 16, 1915. On June 14, 1915, 13-year-old Joe Persons of Butts County, Georgia, raped and murdered an 8-year-old girl. The crime was reported to be so heinous that Persons' father petitioned for his son to be hanged. Following legal procedure in Jackson, Persons was led from his cell to the prison courtyard where the gallows awaited. Newspaper archives from September 26, 1915, described Persons as immature and underdeveloped, weighing only 65 pounds. Local officials even debated adding weights to his body to ensure a successful execution. Though details remain unclear, Persons paid with his life on that day. George Junius Stinney Jr., State, South Carolina. Date of execution, June 16, 1944. On March 23, 1944, searchers discovered the bodies of Betty June Binnicker and Mary Emma Thames in a ditch on the African-American side of Alcolu after the girls failed to return home the previous night. Stinney's father had taken part in the search. Both girls had suffered severe blunt force trauma, which fractured their skulls. According to the medical examiner's report, the injuries had been inflicted by a blunt instrument with a round head about the size of a hammer. The girls were last seen riding their bicycles in search of flowers. As they passed the Stinney's property, they stopped to ask Stinney and his sister, May, if they knew where to find maypops, the local term for passion flowers. May later stated that she had been with Stinney at the time police believed the murders took place. According to a wire service article published on March 24, 1944, the sheriff announced the arrest of George Junius and claimed the boy had confessed and led officers to a hidden piece of iron. Authorities arrested George Stinney and his older brother John on suspicion of murdering the two girls. While police released John, they kept George in custody. He wasn't allowed to see his parents until after his trial and conviction. In a handwritten statement, Deputy H.S. Newman of Clarendon County claimed, "I arrested a boy by the name of George Stinney. He then made a confession and told me where to find a piece of iron, about 15 inches long, which he said he had placed in a ditch, roughly 6 feet from the bicycle." The entire legal proceeding against George Stinney, including jury selection, took place on April 24, 1944. Less than 2 months later, on Friday, June 16, 1944, authorities executed Stinney. Because he was too small for the electric chair, officials used a Bible as a booster seat to prepare him for execution. George Stinney's case has since been cited in debates over the death penalty in the United States. Some say he was innocent and wrongfully executed. Leonard Shockley, State, Maryland. Date of execution, April 10, 1959. On the afternoon of January 16, 1958, 16-year-old Leonard Shockley and his 22-year-old brother Harold found themselves short on cash and desperate to make a quick buck in Box Iron, Maryland. They decided to rob a local general store owned and operated by 39-year-old Sarah Hearn, believing she would likely be alone. As soon as they entered the store, the brothers launched a brutal attack on the mother of 3. Shockley plunged a large hunting knife into Hearn's back. He stabbed her repeatedly before slashing her throat. Moments later, a customer named Clarence Bishop arrived at the store, only to flee the scene immediately. Bishop gave police a detailed description of the Shockley brothers and their vehicle. Eventually, both men were caught and arrested. Harold received a life sentence in prison. Leonard, however, was executed in the Maryland gas chamber on April 10, 1959. Charles Francis Rumbaugh, State, Texas. Date of execution, September 11, 1985. Rumbaugh arrived in Amarillo during the first week of April, 1975. On the morning of April the 5th, which was a Friday, he left his sister's apartment just as the sky began to lighten. No one else in the apartment was awake when he stepped out. He wandered through the streets for a while. He walked down 10th Street and passed a jewelry store called Michael's Jewelry. He glanced inside and saw an older man wearing glasses and a gray or blue suit. A key sat in the inside lock of the door. Rumbaugh circled the block and came back. This time, he walked through the door. Just inside, a display case stood near the entrance with an aisle leading toward the back. He moved around the display case. The old man came forward from the back of the store and asked, "What can I do for you?" Rumbaugh pulled a .25 caliber pistol from his coat pocket and said, "Just remember, your insurance can give you your money back, but they can't give you your life back." He told the old man, "Bag up the money." The old man replied that the money was in the safe near the front. He ordered him to open it. The old man took a long time, so Rumbaugh pressed the pistol to the man's head and said, "Hurry your ass up." The old man finally opened the safe and pulled out a small metal box. He told him to set it down. When he looked inside the safe, Rumbaugh saw some watches and told the man to bring them out. The old man placed them on the floor, and then he said, "Okay, go back there," pointing toward the shop area. The old man walked through a doorway and reached to his left, on top of another safe. There was a gun inside a white money bag. The old man pulled it out. As soon as Rumbaugh saw this, he grabbed the old man and forced him to the floor. The pistol fell from the man's hand, and he reached for it again. Rumbaugh held the gun near the old man's head and fired. The man dropped to the ground. "You dumb son of a bit," he said. When the old man rose again, he shot him a second time. The man fell once more, and Rumbaugh figured he was dead. He grabbed the old man's pistol, stuffed it back into the white bag, and tucked the bag under his arm. Rumbaugh walked to the front of the store and took the cash from the tray, leaving the coins. Then he walked out the door and returned to the apartment. When he got back, everyone was still asleep. Rumbaugh hid the items, then went into the living room, turned on the radio, and smoked some weed. Slowly, the rest of the house began to wake up. He sat for a while and listened, but heard nothing out of place. Later, Rumbaugh went to retrieve the money bag and the pistol. Inside the bag were a box of shells and the gun. He took a pocket knife and cut the bag into pieces, then stuffed them into a sack. He burned the cardboard box that had held the shells. Using a piece of sandpaper, Rumbaugh scrubbed off the inscription on the pistol. It had read, "To Mike, Clarence, and Curly, December 58. Afterward, he changed clothes. He tucked the old man's pistol into his waistband and put away the gun he had used. Charles Francis Rumbaugh was 17 years old when he committed a murder during a robbery. His involvement in crime began early. At the age of 6, he had already started breaking the law, and by 12, he had carried out an armed robbery. On September 11, 1985, Rumbaugh was executed by lethal injection. James Roach. State, South Carolina. Date of execution, January 10, 1986. On October 29, 1977, Roach and his accomplices, Joseph Carl Shaw and Ronald Eugene Mahaffey, spent the morning drinking beer and using drugs. In the early afternoon, the three drove around in an attempt to find a girl to assault. After pulling up beside a parked car at a baseball field outside Columbia, South Carolina, Roach aimed a .22 caliber rifle at the car's occupants, 14-year-old Carlotta Hartness and 17-year-old Thomas Taylor. He demanded their money, and Taylor obliged. Shaw and Mahaffey got out of their car, took Taylor's keys, and forced Hartness into the back seat of Shaw's vehicle. Once they returned to the car, Shaw looked at Roach and said, "Okay, now." At that moment, Roach fired the rifle into the parked car, killing Thomas Taylor. The boys drove Hartness to a dirt road and demanded she undress. She was forced to perform oral sex on Shaw and Mahaffey and was raped repeatedly by all of them. Once they were finished, Shaw then asked who would kill her. Roach volunteered. Shaw ordered Hartness to lie face down on the ground, to which she initially refused and pleaded with them to spare her life. Eventually giving in to their demands, she put her face to the ground, and Roach shot her several times in the head. Shaw shot her in the head once more, then buried the rifle bullets and wallet they had stolen from Taylor earlier. The three then returned to the baseball field to confirm that Taylor was dead. On December 13, 1977, acting on his lawyer's advice, Roach pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder, criminal sexual conduct, kidnapping, and robbery. He was convicted of the rape and murder of a 14-year-old girl and the murder of her 17-year-old boyfriend. Roach was executed by electrocution on January 10, 1986. At the Central Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. J. Kelly Pinkerton, State, Texas. Date of execution, May 15, 1986. Pinkerton was convicted of murdering Sarah Dawn Lawrence, a married female, on the night of October 26, 1979. Pinkerton had murdered Sarah after sexually assaulting her. David Lawrence, husband of the deceased, testified that he called his wife at 9:30 on the night of October 26th and told her he would be home about 11. Upon arriving home at 11:30 p.m., Lawrence found his wife with blood on the side of her face on the floor of their living room. His wife was lying face up between the couch and the coffee table. The lower portion of her body was entirely nude. After examining her more closely, Lawrence noticed a large gaping hole in her throat, with blood still running out of it. Her legs were spread apart, and her panties had been rolled down to the bottom of her right leg. A large Bowie knife was missing from the house. It had been displayed on a rack in the master bedroom. Lawrence last saw the knife in its place when he left for work at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on the 26th. The deceased's purse was also missing. On the 27th, Lawrence noticed that the bottom of a window screen in the master bedroom had been partially pulled out. He also saw red stains on the windowsill beneath the screen. Carolyn Sue Porter, an officer with the Amarillo Police Department, took several photos at the crime scene. One photo showed a palm print in blood on the inside of the deceased's left leg. Porter also lifted a latent palm print in blood from the coffee table next to the body. Sergeant Claude Free of the Amarillo Police Department took an inked palm print of the culprit. Peter Bellicastro, a fingerprint expert with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, compared the photos of the palm print on the deceased's leg with the print from the coffee table and the culprit's inked prints. Bellicastro testified that all these prints belonged to the same person. Officer Ken Ten Brink was the first to encounter Pinkerton 3.5 hours after the murder. Ten Brink went to Pinkerton's home and, not finding him there, searched the surrounding neighborhood. He eventually spotted Pinkerton running across the parking lot of a bookstore a few blocks from the deceased's home. Although Ten Brink chased Pinkerton through several well-lit areas shouting "Police halt" and "Police stop," Pinkerton would not stop. Ten Brink finally caught up with him as he tried to climb over a tall picket fence. He wore jeans and tennis shoes, and his hair was slicked back. Investigator Dennis Hendley helped Ten Brink capture Pinkerton. Hendley said Pinkerton looked as if he had just stepped out of the shower. However, Pinkerton was released shortly after this. He was arrested for Sarah's murder on September 26, 1980, exactly 11 months after it occurred. By that time, several months had already passed since he committed a second murder, the murder of Sherry Hales Welch. Using evidence from investigators and witness testimony, J. Kelly Pinkerton was convicted of capital murder in both the Lawrence case and the Welch case. He was sentenced to death for both murders. He was executed by lethal injection on May 15, 1986. Dalton Prejean, State, Louisiana. Date of execution, May 18, 1990. At about 5 o'clock in the morning, on July 2, 1977, Prejean, his brother Joseph, Michael George, and Michael Broussard left Rogers nightclub in Lafayette Parish. The four had spent the night drinking at various lounges nearby. They left Rogers nightclub in a 1966 Chevrolet driven by Dalton, with his brother sitting in the front seat and the other two in the back. The car's taillights weren't working, and only a few hundred feet from the lounge, Trooper Donald Cleveland, on his way to work in his police vehicle, signaled for the Chevrolet to stop. Prejean and his brother tried to switch places in the front seat because he had been driving without a license. The trooper noticed the switch and ordered the occupants out of the car. He told Michael George and Michael Broussard to get back inside and began searching Prejean's brother Joseph. Prejean, now back in the car, reacted to the trooper pushing Joseph against the car by saying, "I don't like the way he's doing my brother," despite Joseph's protests. Prejean took a .38 caliber revolver from under the car seat, got out of the car, and approached the officer. He hid the gun against his leg. When he got to the trooper, he shot without warning. 2 bullets hit the trooper, and he died instantly. This wasn't Prejean's first murder. At the age of 15 in 1974, he was arrested for the murder of John Doucet, a taxi driver. In a later statement, Prejean explained that he and 2 friends, one of whom had a gun, called a cab with the intent to rob the driver. They asked the driver to take them to a quiet area of town and convinced him to stop while they pretended to look for an address. Prejean said he took the gun from his friend because the friend seemed nervous. He then approached the driver and, believing the man was reaching for a weapon, fired twice and ran from the scene. Prejean was tried as a juvenile and released 2 years later from the Louisiana Training Institute. Within 7 months of his release, he was arrested for the murder of Trooper Cleveland. Dalton Prejean was charged with first-degree murder by a grand jury indictment. The trial began on May 1, 1978, and lasted 3 days. After the trial, a jury of 12 people found Prejean guilty as charged and unanimously recommended the death penalty. On May 18, 1990, Prejean was executed in the electric chair at the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola. Johnny Frank Garrett, State, Texas, date of execution, February 11, 1992. Johnny Frank Garrett was accused of murdering a Catholic nun who lived across the street from his home. The murder took place on the morning of October 31, 1981. Garrett was 17 years old at the time. According to the prosecution, he raped and strangled 76-year-old Sister Tadea Benz in the St. Francis Convent. Garrett was tried and convicted of the crime. He was held at the Ellis Unit, north of Huntsville, Texas, which at the time housed men on the state's death row. His execution was originally scheduled for January 6, 1992. However, after Pope John Paul II requested clemency, Texas Governor Ann Richards granted a reprieve. Following the reprieve, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles held a hearing to consider commuting Garrett's sentence to life in prison. The board voted to retain the death sentence. Garrett was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville Unit on February 11, 1992. Sean Richard Sellers, State, Oklahoma, date of execution, February 4, 1999. Sellers and his best friend, Richard Howard, had often talked about what it might feel like to kill someone. Sellers later confessed to the murder of Robert Paul Bauer, a 32-year-old clerk at a Circle K convenience store. The killing took place on September 8, 1985, after Bauer refused to sell beer to Howard. According to Howard, who witnessed but did not take part in the murder, Sellers said he wanted to see what it feels like to kill somebody. Sellers also admitted he had tried to kill his mother following a fight about his girlfriend, whom his mother disliked. He served his mother several cups of coffee laced with rat poison, but the attempt failed. On March 5, 1986, Sellers shot and killed his mother and stepfather, Vonda and Lee Belafato, while they were asleep. Sellers wore just underwear to limit the blood spatter on himself. He shot his stepfather first, then his stepmother. Then she woke up to the shot of her husband. Sellers attempted to cover up his guilt by staging the crime scene to make it appear as though an intruder had carried out the murders. After the killings, Sellers went to Howard's house and confessed to murdering his parents, according to Howard's testimony. Although Howard was originally charged with first-degree murder, the court later dropped the charge. Instead, he received a 5-year suspended sentence for acting as an accessory after the fact, following his agreement to testify against Sellers. During his trial, Sellers claimed he practiced Satanism at the time of the murders and blamed the killings on demonic possession by a spirit he named Ezurate. In later documents, he said he had read the Satanic Bible by Anton LaVey hundreds of times between the ages 15 and 16 when the crimes took place. In a prison letter described as a confession, Sellers looked back on that chapter of his life. I got very involved in Satanism. I truly thought it was an honest way to live, and the rituals of it would enable me to control my life. A jury found Sellers guilty of multiple murders in 1986 and sentenced him to death. On February 4, 1999, officials at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester carried out his execution by lethal injection. Scott Hain, State, Oklahoma, date of execution, April 3, 2003. When Scott Hain was 17, he and Robert Wayne Lambert, who was 21, kidnapped Michael Houghton and Laura Sanders outside a bar in Tulsa, Oklahoma. After robbing the two restaurant co-workers of $565, they forced them into the trunk of a car and burned them alive. Hain and Lambert returned hours later to the scene to inspect the charred remains of their victims. For their crime, the two killers were sentenced to death. Because Hain was only 17 at the time of the murders, the case attracted international attention and sparked harsh criticism of his sentence. 16 years after the double homicide, Hain was executed just hours after the U.S. Supreme Court denied his final request for a stay of execution. Until his death, Hain maintained his innocence, arguing that he was a minor acting under Lambert's control. Lambert, who remains on death row, has sought to have his sentence overturned, citing the Supreme Court's ruling that prohibits executing individuals with intellectual disabilities. Paula Cooper, State, Indiana. Date of execution, unspecified. Cooper was 15 when she killed Ruth Pelka, a 78-year-old woman. According to police, Cooper skipped school with 3 friends: Denise Thomas, aged 14, Karen Corder, aged 16, and April Beverly, aged 15. The group drank alcohol and smoked marijuana before visiting Pelke, a neighbor, supposedly to ask about Bible lessons. One of the girls struck Pelke with a vase, cut her arms and legs. Cooper stabbed Pelke 33 times with a butcher knife before stealing $10 and her car. Cooper's lawyers portrayed her as a victim of abuse who had attended 10 different schools by the time of the murder. She also had a prior record for running away and burglary. However, few questioned her guilt in the case. Authorities considered her the ringleader of the group, who all received sentences ranging from 25 to 60 years for their roles in the crime. After her arrest, Cooper reportedly attacked guards at the juvenile center and had to be transferred to the county jail. While there, she allegedly bragged about the crime and said she would do it again. On July 11, 1986, Cooper was sentenced to death. Her age and sentence sparked international outrage. In 1989, officials commuted her sentence to 60 years in prison. On June 17, 2013, Cooper was released from Rockville Correctional Facility. She died on May 26, 2015 in an apparent suicide. If you like the way we create videos and you want us to bring more cases like this to light, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives.